On the Kiwi this morning.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Talking politics with Phil Goff.
Indeed, talking politics with Phil Goff, joining us from Wellington, where it's not foggy today. G'day there, Phil.
Yeah, g'day, Wammo. A bit better today. Yesterday I spent 2.5 hours flying over the top of the capital, not landing and going back to Auckland, only to come down again. So there you go. It's been a dreadful summer in Wellington, everybody tells me down here. So Aucklanders and others rejoice.
Yeah, how long did you spend in the air?
About 2.5 hours, actually. I was on the 7 o'clock flight down, due at the opening of the new Supreme Court building. We hovered over, stooged around Wellington until about, must have been about 8:45, and then they said, well, we can't get in. We don't have enough petrol to keep on doing this. So we headed back. So got back into Auckland about 9:30. So, yeah, great way to start off the working week, 2.5 hours, and end up where you began.
Yeah,
it's a bit like politics, really.
Well, that's right, exactly. You could have almost made it to Australia in that time.
Well, actually, you could have. You could have got most of the way to Sydney on the same time.
Yeah.
But, hey, that's the way it went. So we ended up getting one of those little banderantes down and chartering it down, and had a plane full of people, so it didn't work out much more expensive, but that added another hour and a half to the morning's work.
Right.
Finally got in sometime after midday.
So the big business of the day yesterday was the opening of the Supreme Court. I'm a little bit puzzled, though, why a member of the royal family was opening it when, in fact, the Supreme Court was actually removing the ties back to England when it comes to our court system.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I guess my explanation is you have a separation in New Zealand quite properly between the executive and the judiciary, and therefore the head of the Supreme Court, Dame Shana Elias, wanted to have the head of state open it. Well, that could have been the Queen, but she wasn't available. She delegated it, interestingly, for the first time to her grandson, William. Could have been done, I guess, by the Governor-General, but either way, look, I think it went off quite well. I had the chance to have lunch with Prince William, first time I'd met with him. Seemed like a very pleasant young man, was engaging, was personable. But, somewhere in the background, New Zealanders understand that ultimately, I guess we will have our own head of state, but I don't think New Zealanders are rushing into that. And we need to have a proper process whereby we can try to build as large a consensus as we can around what New Zealanders want. I think New Zealanders basically want a head of state that's not political, but then that's a decision for them. People, quite happy with the role of the Governor-General. So one option would be to have somebody in the role of the Governor-General, but, formally as the New Zealand head of state. But as I say, there's no rush over that decision. We need to start the conversation. We need to have the discussion. And at a certain point in time, I think you'll find that a majority of New Zealanders opt for New Zealand having its own head of state rather than the head of state that's located, 18,000 kilometres away in another country.
And as you say, it is worthwhile having that conversation. And I was actually talking to some friends the other day about it, because people are, over the teacups, I suppose, talking about this kind of stuff. What would in fact actually be the difference? Because we'd still be in the Commonwealth if we had our own head of state. So what would actually be the everyday difference for our government?
Well, if we chose the model that we currently have, somebody with the existing powers of the Governor-General, essentially there would be no difference, except our formal head of state would be a New Zealand citizen rather than the serving monarch in the United Kingdom. The other option that people would have is to have an elected president, as Ireland does and other places, which would mean that there would be a more political role for the president. But as I say, we don't need to rush into that decision. We need to have the conversation. We need to have New Zealanders involved in it. We need to try to determine where the consensus lies. And at the point that New Zealanders are ready to have their own head of state, to start to move in that direction. But better to start the conversation now than to have some rushed process further downstream. Well, this is a major symbolic change for New Zealand. It needs care, it needs consideration, it needs the involvement of all New Zealanders.
Are we waiting for older generations to die off? Is that what we're waiting for?
I think there's probably I haven't seen polling on it, but there's probably a greater sentiment for New Zealand having its own head of state amongst younger people and older people that have remembered the Queen as being our head of state for most of their lifetimes. And I think there's a huge respect for the Queen, you know, as an individual. I think she's done an enormously good job, you know, under sometimes trying circumstances. So there's an affection for the Queen, and I think near universally there's no desire to offer any insult to or rejection of the Queen per se as an individual. I think it's simply about a coming of age for New Zealand at a particular point in its history, and I think, you know, what the polling I have seen suggests that most people expect that sometime, you know, over the next few decades, New Zealand will become a republic with its own head of state.
So what do you make of the new Supreme Court building and the way it's all set up there?
Well, I've got mixed feelings about the so-called Pahutakawa and rata tree outside of the building. As somebody said in Wellington, oh, it's great to have the opening, but why didn't they take the scaffolding down? Inside, actually, I've got to say it's a pretty impressive building. They've kept the old Wellington High Court, so they've got the old main courtroom there, which is quite an impressive old building, and I'm in favour of preserving the history of the country, its notable buildings. And the new court too, I've got to say it's a very different design. It's bronze or copper sheathed on the outside visible from within the building, and inside it's wooden. I think architecturally inside the building really does work, but the outside, you know, I reserve my judgment. It's a bit like an artwork. It's in the eye of the beholder. It doesn't quite come off for me on the outside, but, you know, that's an individual view.
Phil, what do you make of Murray McCully's moves to create some more friendly relations with Fiji once again?
Well, I had a conversation with Murray McCully before he made the announcement, because Fiji's been an area that I've been involved with over a long period of time. I think you do need to have diplomatic relations between countries, particularly when you've got the interchange of people between our two countries. We've got thousands and thousands of New Zealanders that holiday in Fiji. They need to have consular services available to them. We have immigration from Fiji that's got to be properly regulated. We've traditionally had good cooperation with the police forces to combat drug trafficking. And you also need a channel of communication to talk to another government, even when you fundamentally disagree with what they might be doing. So I'm in favour of trying to restore the presence on the ground of New Zealand diplomats. But after we've had three high commissioners or acting high commissioners thrown out, you're not going to put somebody back in unless you have some assurance that there's not going to be an arbitrary removal at the whim of the military leader of Fiji of that person. Because, you know, if Commodore Bainimarama can remove them at his whim, well, there's no point in having a person there. So the agreement so far is to put in a position called a counsellor, which is a sort of a neutral ranked position, with an agreement in principle to restore a deputy high commissioner reciprocally. And I'm in favour of that. I mean, I would very much like to see the improvement in relationships with the government of Fiji, but it can't simply be on their terms with no compromise on their part. It's their military regime that overthrew democracy, that has arbitrary detention without trial, people being beaten up near to death in custody, intrusion on the freedom of the media's censored, the judiciary, the independence of the judiciary has been broken, the constitution has been revoked. You can't have a military leader go in and do that and not face some consequences. So any movement and improvement of the overall relationships got to be a two-way process.
Does any of this, though, validate Frank's position as the leader in Fiji?
No. He has no validity. He could have gone to an election. He promised to go to an election. He reneged on that promise. And the reason that he reneged on it was not because of any practical means of, getting an election process going. God, he's been running the place as a military dictatorship now for over, 3 years. So he does not have that legitimacy, and ultimately Fiji has to come back to have a leadership that has a mandate from its own people. That's a fundamental human right. Democracy is fundamental in terms of principles of governance, particularly in our part of the world. So, but he won't give up power as long as he feels that he may be held responsible for some of his actions in the past.
Phil Goff, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Wammo. Good to talk to you, mate.
See ya.
Catch you again.
It is the leader of the Labour Party, Phil Goff, joining us this morning from Wellington City, where he's eventually been able to land